Kevin Harvick entered the 2022 Cup Series season like the rest of the competition, uncertain of what to expect in the new next-gen car. For the 46-year-old, learning how to pilot a completely new vehicle would be challenging enough, but doing so on the heels of going winless last season for the first time since 2009 only magnified the situation. Through the first 22 races this year, the number 4 Stewart-Haas Racing car had performed well, including 5 top 5 finishes, the best being runner-up at Richmond in the spring, but victory lane remained elusive. In late summer, on August the 6th, Harvick made news not for his on-track performance, but for his comments in Michigan on safety concerns about the next-gen car.
I don't think you're making enough noise. It's never the first line item on the to-do list. So, I can tell you from a driver, every time I hit something, it's a lot harsher than any hit that I took in any of the other cars. The only thing I can compare it to is hitting a concrete wall compared to what it used to be. So, I think that's the issue. It's not, you look at the cars and they're like, oh man, they look great. That's the problem. Nothing flew off of it, right? That's the problem, and all that energy is absorbed through you. So it feels like you get hit by the hammer and the car survives, but is that really what you want? Like, you know what I mean? So, I think, the cars are all together and that looks great, but it doesn't feel great.
The very next day, he made headlines for his racing when he snapped his 65-race winless streak and, more importantly, clinched a spot in the playoffs. But he wasn't done. Incredibly, after such a prolonged drought, the SHR driver did it again, claiming victory the following week at Richmond. In a matter of a couple of weeks, the 2014 Cup Series champ had gone from someone experts understandably began to suggest might not ever win another race to someone who had gotten hot and was now considered a favorite heading into the postseason. Fast forward a few weeks later to those playoffs and the first race at Darlington when Harvick found himself in the headlines again, not for his performance, but for what he had to say after his race shockingly ended early when his car caught on fire.
I'm sure it's just the crappy parts on the race car like we've seen so many times. We haven't fixed anything. It's kind of like the safety stuff. We just let it keep going and keep going. What a disaster, man. No reason. We didn't touch the wall, we didn't touch the car, and here we are in the pits with a burned up car and can't finish the race during the playoffs because of crappy ass parts.
He was just getting started. After Bristol a week later, where multiple cars experienced steering issues, Harvick took to Twitter promoting a new shirt mocking the crappy parts. A couple of days later, NASCAR Senior Vice President of Competition Scott Miller responded.
Bristol is definitely a unique load case, and some things cropped up with the steering that weren't expected. But with the newness of this car and the newness of everything, it's not acceptable to have problems, but it's probably part of the learning process for us all. And all the teams and OEMs were involved in the RFP process when we chose the parts, so it's everybody's got a stake in this, and it's not just NASCAR choosing quote unquote crappy parts.
A week later, after the Texas race, when it was announced Alex Bowman would be missing the race at Talladega after suffering a concussion, Harvick shared his frustration on Twitter. Completely unacceptable that those in charge have let things get to this point, he wrote. I remember it like it was yesterday, Denny Hamlin, in the presentation of the new car to the drivers pleading that the car was too stiff. Data didn't agree. Time to listen to the drivers crashing them. Harvick hasn't backed down and has undeniably been a thorn in NASCAR's side for the last half of the season. That's why many didn't find it all that surprising when NASCAR recently announced a major penalty for the number 4 team after discovering modification to a single-source supplied part during its random inspection at the R&D Center. With 60 wins and a Cup title to his credit, the 46-year-old Harvick doesn't have anything left to prove. He's destined for the Hall of Fame, and most importantly, he doesn't need the headaches anymore. So that's why this weekend's news that he will race a final year at Stewart-Haas in 2023 didn't come as a complete surprise. However, it was the way it came about and the words that were included in the casual announcement that brought attention to a completely different issue. there is trouble brewing at SHR. Just moments before the Las Vegas race began, team co-owner Gene Haas talked with reporters on the grid, and that's when he dropped a couple of bombshell news items, including a disagreement with Tony Stewart about who should drive the number 41 car in 2023. Gene Haas on grid said he wants Cole Custer to return to 41 next year, but Tony Stewart wants to give Ryan Preece a shot, so TBD for 2023, Bob Pockris tweeted. Haas also said Kevin Harvick has indicated he won't return after 2023 when his deal ends, but Haas is trying to convince him to do an extension. The disagreement between Haas and Stewart on Custer reveals a crack in the relationship and appears to be a hint of something bigger. If you'll recall, it was just last week that Stewart didn't hide his frustration with NASCAR, sharing a tweet that he was looking for a new weekend hobby, something with low drama. That tweet came after NASCAR had announced the decision for Custer and his last lap move at the Charlotte Roval, which included another massive penalty for SHR. Stewart was asked late last week about the penalties during an event in Texas. After initially declining to discuss it, the three-time Cup Series champion indirectly addressed the matter and didn't mince words. Super glad I'm going drag racing this weekend, he said. If it weren't for the fact that I've got a couple of appearances that I have to make, I wouldn't be in another NASCAR race the rest of the year. Wouldn't waste my time. The disagreement with Haas on Custer in the number 41 car is just another thing that the Hall of Famer can add to his growing list of things in NASCAR that make him unhappy. By his recent statements alone, it feels like Stewart could potentially be done with NASCAR and he wants to focus his efforts on his NHRA team. If that's the case, and Harvick steps away after 2023 as has been reported, maybe Harvick takes over for Stewart on the ownership side. It's a super intriguing scenario and one to keep an eye on in the months ahead.